While at Star Wars Celebration Anaheim, Roqoo Depot had the chance to interview author Drew Karpyshyn. We covered his work with Star Wars, Mass Effect, Forgotten Realms, and touched on his original fantasy series, The Chaosborn, as well as his upcoming short story collection. Alright, Drew. Your second novel was Throne of Ball, a novelization of Baldur's Gate 2 Throne of Ball video game expansion. Well, I haven't read that book yet. You said on your site that it didn't quite click with fans. Around 5 years later, you wrote Mass Effect Revelation, which is a book I have read. It's a great book, and I think it got pretty good reception. What lessons were you able to take from one and apply to the other?
So the biggest lesson was when I was writing Throne of Ball that I learned was that a Bioware game has too much content to put in one book. So with Throne of Ball, we tried to tell the story of the game in the book. So there's a couple problems with that. One, there's too much content, and two, with the Bioware game, you make your own story. So when I tell a story, I'm basically saying, here's my version of your story, and people didn't want to hear that. With Mass Effect, what we did was we said, okay, the Mass Effect universe is this great universe that people want to know more about. So we told a different story that had connections to the story in the game, but it was its own unique story with some new characters, and you got some extra background on the characters you knew. And that was, I think, the key. It's all about, instead of retelling them something they've already heard, it's expanding on what they've already grown to love. So it's adding more to it. So that was the big lesson.
From 2006 to 2010, you alternated between two trilogies in two different sci-fi franchises. One year you were doing a Darth Bane book, and the next year you'd be doing a Mass Effect novel. Was it difficult switching back and forth?
It was a little bit. I always had to take a little time to sort of reset my thinking when I would jump between Mass Effect and Star Wars. There are some similarities to the universes, but there's a lot of differences. Mass Effect's more of, let's say, hard sci-fi than, say, Star Wars, which is more like almost a space fantasy. But there are also some similarities, and they each have their own unique terminology and sort of conventions. And every once in a while I would, do something kind of silly, like I would refer to biotics as the Force or vice versa. And I mean, they're not the same, but there's some similarities. So there was always that little time to readjust when I jumped back and forth. But, once I got into it, I was able to focus. But of course, at the time, I was also still working on games, either Mass Effect or Star Wars games, too. So yeah, I would maybe do a morning of Star Wars, work on a game, and then come home and write a Mass Effect book. So it was, at least it kept it fresh.
In either case, were you able to plot out the trilogies ahead of time, or was it a surprise when they both turned into trilogies?
With both the Mass Effect and the Star Wars Darth Bane stuff, I didn't expect them to be trilogies, but I hoped that they would continue. So I always tried to make sure each book was its own standalone story, just in case they didn't. But then I also wanted to make sure that I left some doors open and some things I could refer back to or build on or carry forward, so that when you read all three books together, you see that they are connected. There's an ongoing sort of thread.
Did any ideas from one trilogy make its way into the other?
Big themes repeat in my work. I'm big on the theme of redemption. I'm big on the exploration of what evil is and what it means to be evil, and, how people get corrupted or fall. That kind of sort of overarching theme you'll see in pretty much anything I write. But as far as specific plot points or things like that, I was pretty good about making sure each one had their own standalone ideas, and there wasn't a lot of crossover.
What did you learn from writing those two trilogies?
Well, when I wrote both the Star Wars and Mass Effect trilogies, I was kind of in what I consider the middle stage of my writing career. I had written a few books, but I was still sort of feeling my way around. I think I learned how to be a more efficient writer. It used to take me a long time to write a book, and I would get bogged down. As far as my storytelling, I hope I've matured a little bit, but that's up to fans to decide. But I think my style stayed pretty consistent. And really, I just had to learn to manage my time, because doing so many books, I think I ended up doing 9 books in 7 years or something like that, plus working on the games for BioWare. It really taught me how to sort of focus my time and focus my energy.
It kind of falls along to my next one. How did you use that experience and apply it to your Chaosborn trilogy?
So the Chaosborn trilogy is a an actual trilogy, a story that expands all 3 books. It's a little more ambitious. They're not each standalone stories that are just connected. And it's a completely unique universe that I made myself from scratch, whereas Star Wars was pre-existing and Mass Effect was something we built as a team at BioWare. So when I went to the Chaosborn trilogy, I had to take a lot of the lessons that I had taken from how to build a universe in Mass Effect and apply them to a fantasy world. I had to sort of take all the stuff I learned about managing and creating an overarching story that stretches across a very broad sort of timeline and put that all together. And I think it's just a more complicated series, so I don't think I would have been able to write it if I hadn't had the experience of writing like the Darth Bane and the Mass Effect stuff.
Now, the Chaos Unleashed won't be out until July, and this is going to be the 3rd book in your 3rd trilogy. What can fans expect this time around?
So I do have one bit of bad news, is they've actually moved that release date to October. And that was not because it's not written, it's written, but there was just, we call them production issues, printing and conflict schedules and stuff. So it's coming out in October. What fans are going to see is, with the Chaosborn trilogy, it's a single story. So the first 2 books kind of have cliffhanger endings. They leave you kind of stuck where you're like, oh, there's more to come, there's more to come. You'll finally get that awesome conclusion. It is a trilogy. It's not going to spin out into 4 or 5 books. There's a definite ending. You're going to see this epic confrontation that I've been building toward. And I don't want to give away too many spoilers, but all the stories for each of the main characters, each of the Children of Fire, the 4 storylines, have started to come together, but they all finally come together into one sort of massive confrontation at the end.
Now, aside from trilogies, you're working on a short story anthology. How's that coming along?
So the short story anthology is done. Most of the stories were things I had already written, so I just had to clean them up, put it together. It's actually going to be published on May 15th. It's a self-publish with the help of my agency, Curtis Brown, because most publishers don't want to deal with short story collections. There's usually not a lot of profit in it. And it's a small sort of boutique book. It's only 100 pages, 10 stories. It's going to be out on all the digital formats, Kindle and everything else. Plus, people will be able to order hard copies if they want. So it's done. I'm looking forward to getting it out there. Some of the stories have already been published, but most of them will be released to the public for the first time.
Will it be the same retailers for the physical copies?
Yeah, you'll be able to get it either through my website or through the typical places, Amazon and Barnes & Noble. It'll probably be only available online. People, not too likely the stores will stock it, and you'll have to order it. But, like I said, people can get it through my website, drewkarpyshyn.com, or if it's a digital one, whatever their particular reader is, it should be available there.
And you said most of the stories are existing ones. Was there any new ones?
Well, 3 of the stories were previously published. Most of the stories were things I had worked on in my past, but had never published. So I basically went in and cleaned them up and putting them out. So 7 of the stories are brand new, never before seen. And the other 3 were seen, but in very small print magazines, so it's unlikely people will run across them.
Are they all sci-fi or fantasy?
There's always a speculative element. Most of them are fantasy and horror. There's a little bit of sci-fi, but a lot of horror, some contemporary horror, some sort of sword and sorcery fantasy type stuff. But everything I write is kind of got a speculative slant to it, so these stories all fall into that. And a little bit more humor in those than what people might expect from some of my books. 3 or 4 of the stories have quite a bit of humor in them.
All right. Well, thank you.
Hey, no problem.
Thank you for listening to our interview with Drew Karpyshyn. If you would like to listen to more Star Wars interviews or check out some of our reviews and other coverage, please head on over to RoqooDepot.com.